Hey guys, it's January 12th, 10:58 p.m. I want to do a quick video on trade clusters and the FANG stocks. So we'll start here with Apple. What this chart shows is the largest trade since December OPEX, which for Apple happens to be the 5th largest trade in its history. It's 380 times larger than average. It's 48.2 million shares. In total, it's a very large trade. It's about $6.4 billion. And along with that trade, which is not pictured, are a bunch of other smaller trades, large trades that are smaller than this. And each of these blue lines here shows where a trade cluster resides, and they're listed here on the left. So a trade cluster is just a collection of 2 or more trades at the same price, 2 or more institutional trades at the same price. So for this time frame, December 16th to present, the largest cluster is this one here at 134.50. It's $9.2 billion. And the reason I bring it up is because it is an area, well, given the size of this cluster, it is an area of strong support and resistance. In this case, it's resistance, and price came up after, a month or so, and retested it today and failed. So I wanted to call that out. It doesn't mean that it's not going to pass this level. It just means that it's a difficult level to pass, and it is a reasonable target to try to attain on any kind of a rebound, which is what began around the first of the year in Apple. So we've got a small bump, retrace, larger, and then this here ends right almost exactly on that 134.50 line. Looks like it poked just a hair above, and then it failed. And that happened, I think, pre-market during the CPI release. It came down, it came back up later and got didn't get quite as close, but it got close, and then it retreated a bit in the afternoon. So this is an area which will be difficult for price to overcome in all likelihood. And that doesn't mean go out and buy a bunch of puts and short it. It just means that if you're long, this is a good place to consider protecting that long. All right, moving on. Nvidia. Back on December OPEX, this trade was 6.5 million shares at 165.71, and it was the 9th largest trade in its history. Also a very significant level, and you can see very similarly, price came down, bounced, and hit that target today. So this was price has come full circle since this December OPEX trade, which was very large. This cluster here is 9 million shares, $1.5 billion. For Netflix, that's a very large cluster of trades. So there's a lot of inventory here that price will have to cut through in order to get beyond it. It's not to say that it can't or that it won't. It's just an area of resistance. You can see it also tested it up here shortly after December 16th, and maybe a week later. Failed, came down, now it's come all the way back up and tested again. And you can also see it tested this cluster below, failed the first time, failed the second time, eventually overcame. Each of these lines is significant because that is where a lot of institutional activity takes place. And you can see price will oscillate between them. Price oscillated between these 2 clusters, broke down, oscillated between these 2 clusters, broke down, came up, reversed right near this cluster, tested again, here, and then here, and then here. It's just ping pong, bouncing from one cluster to the next, where all the institutional activity is taking place. So this area here is much larger in terms of dollars. It's 1.5 billion, much larger than this one and this one and this one and this one. So that suggests that it will be harder for price to overcome that level. Okay. Moving right along, and just for the record, on each of these charts, I'm only showing the largest trade in this time period. There are a lot more trades that are not being shown. I'm just trying to highlight the largest and then highlight where the clusters are and talk about price action between them. Moving on to Microsoft. This trade here was the largest trade in the entire history of Microsoft. I have data going back to 2007. Microsoft has obviously been around longer than that, and it is entirely possible, I suppose, that a larger trade could have come before that, but price was so much lower, and there was so much less money in the economy and certainly in the stock market that I think it's pretty unlikely that there was a trade larger than this. But for all intents and purposes, whether it was the largest or second largest or third largest doesn't really matter that much. It matters that it was very, very, very large. In this case, it was 30 million shares, and it was 7.5 billion. You can see this cluster here at 244.70 actually totals 15 billion. It's about twice as large as just that trade, because there are dozens and dozens of other smaller trades that are large in their own right, just not as large as this, that also traded at that level, both on OPEX here and then during this retest here, and perhaps even over here during this second retest. Price came down, institutions traded here. You see a cluster is formed by these two lines here. Two clusters actually, not one. Price went up, retested OPEX and failed, which is not a surprise given how large that trade was, and found its way all the way down here. And what's not shown is there was another big trade down here, not as big as this, but big enough, and we've got a bounce from it, and price is now retraced back to these two clusters here, which are very close to each other, 239.80 and 240.50, so it's about 1.3 billion for each of those two clusters here. Should it overcome that, the next test is going to be here, and I would be surprised if it exceeded this level, especially on the first attempt. But we'll see what happens. This is going to be a really tough level for price to overcome. All right, moving on. Now we have Netflix. Netflix is here. This is a slightly different story. The largest trade in Netflix in a long time was also here on December 16th. It was the second largest trade in its history, and 57 times larger than average and just under 3 million shares. This is following a different pattern than what we saw with Apple and Nvidia and Microsoft, because price had already bottomed, or I don't know if this is a permanent bottom or just a temporary bottom, but price had fallen much lower. You can see this big gap here way back in the spring and summer. What's interesting about this is that this level is obviously very important because it's so strong, or so large in terms of dollars. Price is above it, which is a good sign. But on the other hand, price closed the gap today from this drop. And if you look a little closer, we're going back here. This is at 330. Let's see, 333.22 is the low here, and it drops down about, I don't know, 80 bucks. Price exceeded that here in the pre-market during the CPI move. So the gap was closed here. Regular trading hours, it traded down and came back up, and then I posted about this as well. We got a 1 million share trade here, which is pretty substantial for Netflix, and it was on a dark pool. It was 1 million exactly, so decent chance it's tied to an options transaction, and price retreated. Now it's not a really sharp retreat, but it is a retreat, and price closed a couple dollars lower, $3 lower or so from where that trade executed. So the gap filled. A large trade came in at the level, very, very close to the level that filled the gap, and price turned back down. So I thought that was a significant development that was worth discussing. Still really good that it got above this, but some concern, I'd say, for the bullish stance that a big player showed up as soon as the gap was filled and price turned back. But we'll see what comes in the next couple of days. Moving on to Amazon. This one, of all the FANG stocks, looks the most promising in my opinion. This trade here, which also was December OPEX, was 45 million shares, 120 times larger than average, and it was the fourth largest trade in Amazon history. So quite substantial in terms of dollars. And you can see these 5 lines kind of all bunched together here between 85 and 95, which tells you there were 5 clusters, all very close, which tells you that the 5 largest clusters in this period of time, going back to October, are all right here in a very narrow, tight zone, and price has come up out of all of them. So all this money here, 6.3 billion, 2.3 billion, 2.2 billion, 2.1 and 2.1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 50, so $15 billion, give or take, that's traded over here in this zone since November, and price is above all of it. So that tells you that those trades were either covers or buys in all likelihood. Not to say that every trade was that way, but I'm sure there were some sells mixed in here too. But the fact that price has exceeded all of these clusters tells you that this is a much more bullish posture. Because if all this action in this zone was selling, a lot less likely that price would be above all of those sells. In fact, it's almost almost impossible. So anyway, Amazon of the FANG stocks looks the best. It's also obviously above this big trade here. So blue skies for I guess. Got a gap here to work on. It did close today just above that cluster, and it did kind of test this resistance area here. This will be the next one, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So Amazon looks the most likely to be bullish, I'd say, or to have potentially bottomed. But we'll see. There's a lot of game left here. Moving on to Google. December 16th, largest trade, 18 million shares. This guy is the 6th largest trade in Google history. Price is still kind of in this chop zone here. It is technically above the level that this trade came in, which was 90.86. It closed at 91.92. So it's maybe $1 higher, which is good, but you can see that price just barely poked above this cluster here and retreated back into the zone where these two clusters are, and it just kind of squirreled around in between. So difficult to say if it's going to come back down and spend more time in this zone chopping around, potentially resolve lower, or if it's going to get back above, or stay above this trade and get above these clusters and then proceed up. We shall see. Meta. This one's different than all the other ones. This goes back to July, this trade. We've got two clusters up here where you can see there's a lot of price action. We've got two down here, and one of them includes this large trade, which was 10 million shares on December 16th, and it's the 12th largest trade in its history. This one is interesting because there's a big gap here from 130 to 100 or so, and there's a big trade here that came between, or in that gap, and price has come up above not just this trade, but it's closed the gap and it's poked up a little bit higher. So it's now above these three clusters and this very large trade. So a more promising outlook for Meta than, let's say, Apple or Nvidia or Microsoft, which are all trading below that big December OPEX trade. And then last but not least, we have Tesla. This guy here, this trade here, is the second largest trade in its history. I remember when this came in, this was during September OPEX. There was a lot of doubt when I posted about this that this would be anything but bullish. Obviously, you can tell that it wasn't bullish at all, and price has been in a free fall for the last 4 months or so. We've got this big cluster here, we've got a few lower here. Price closed right on this cluster here, which is 1.2 billion, 10 million shares or so across several dates. On the more promising side, you can see volume has been steadily increasing here, which is generally a sign that this is going to reverse back up, and you can see on the vol profile here that a lot of inventory has been traded in the zone. So maybe it's bottomed, maybe it's just a bounce, I don't know, but promising, I'd say, at least in the short term. But there's a lot of work ahead. It has suffered a lot of technical damage. It could, I don't know if it's going to break a little bit lower, or if it's going to, or if it did bottom and it's going to kind of continue back up. But somewhat promising, just that a lot of damage has been done since this guy came in. So we'll see what the future holds. That's it. If you have questions, send me an email, info@volumeleaders.com. My DMs are open on Twitter. If you want to get more of these videos, just like and subscribe. There's a YouTube channel with a bunch of other videos like this, some educational, some talking about individual trades and individual stocks. Thanks for your time, guys. Bye.